Hola, queridos aprendientes. Hello, dear learners. Bienvenidos al curso básico de Lengua y Cultura Españolas. Welcome to the Basic Spanish Language and Culture course. Mi nombre es Akshay Kale, soy vuestro profesor de español para este curso en línea. My name is Akshay Kale and I will be your Spanish professor for this online Spanish course. En este video vamos a aprender sobre la conjugación de verbos regulares y algunos verbos irregulares en el presente de indicativo. In this video, we are going to learn about the conjugation of regular verbs and some irregular verbs in the present tense, which is called presente de indicativo in Spanish. So, let's go. En este video vais a repasar la conjugación de los verbos regulares en el presente de indicativo, ver algunos usos del presente de indicativo, aprender a conjugar verbos con irregularidad en la primera persona del singular. In this video, you will revise the conjugation of regular verbs in the present tense, look at some uses of the present tense, and learn to conjugate verbs with irregularity in the first person singular. Dear students, as you are aware, to conjugate a verb in the present tense or in any other tense, you will need the root of the verb and the particular ending that expresses information about the action you wish to communicate. You will find the root or radical of the verb in its infinitive form. In English, it is easy to spot an infinitive because it is preceded by the word to. For example, to shop. How is it said in Spanish? ¿Cómo se dice en español? To shop, comprar. To learn, aprender. To receive, recibir, etc. But infinitives in Spanish are not preceded by a particular word, but can be recognized by one of these endings, which are ar, o, ir. The infinitive endings are attached to the root of the verb. As we have already seen, the verbs comprar would be comp plus ar. In this case, hablar, habl plus ar, beb plus which is beber. ¿Qué significa beber, chicos? ¿Qué significa beber, estudiantes, queridos estudiantes? Well, beber is to drink, right? Decid plus ir. Decid más ir sería decidir, right? The verb decidir. What does it mean, dear students? What do you think does it mean? Right. Decidir, like in English, is to decide, right? Decidir. The three groups of infinitives are called the first, second, and third conjugation, respectively. To conjugate a verb in Spanish, to conjugate any verb in Spanish, drop the ar, or ir and replace it with the corresponding ending that agrees with the subject doing the action. For example, habló con mi mamá todos los días. Los españoles comen mucho pescado. El coche consume mucha gasolina. As you can see, the infinitive forms have changed here, right? Hablar becomes hablo because it's yo hablo, I speak. Comer becomes comen because it's speaking about the Spaniards. Los españoles comen mucho pescado. The Spaniards eat a lot of fish. So comer becomes comen, right? And consumir, el coche consume, so we're referring to the car consumes a lot of petrol, el coche consume mucha gasolina. Consumir, the verb ending in ir, becomes consume in the sentence. Because conjugation endings tell who the subject is, subject pronouns in Spanish are usually omitted. Dear students, please make note of this fact. Atención. Ojo, please pay attention, right? The O of the form hablo in the example which you have seen reveals the subject is yo, but the pronoun is generally omitted unless it is used to distinguish the subject or to place emphasis on the subject. So otherwise, in Spanish, you won't really use yo hablo, you just say hablo because the verb would indicate who the subject is, right? But conjugated verb endings tell more than just who does the action. Usually these endings convey the following. The tense or time. Actions take place in the present, past or future. Sales muy tarde. You leave very late. Sales, you leave, is like hablo, I speak. Each indicates an action in the present tense. The S ending can only refer to the person tú in the present tense of the indicative mood. The mood that expresses the attitude of the speaker along with the tense is another important information conveyed by the endings. With hablo and sales, the speaker indicates that these actions are perceived as a fact or reality. I speak, you leave. This is called the indicative mood, modo indicativo of the verb. The examples vendo and sales are in the indicative mood. For example, vender would be to sell, I sell is vendo, because these verbs communicate actions perceived as factual or real. Los verbos regulares en el presente de indicativo. Regular verbs in the present tense. Now let's look at the formation of the present tense for the regular verbs. To form the present tense, drop the r, or ir from the root or radical of the infinitive and add the ending that corresponds to the subject. The following verbs can be used as models for all regular verbs in the sentence. So as we can see, hablar is to speak, comer is to eat, vivir is to live. For example, yo hablo español, I speak Spanish, los españoles comen mucho pescado, the Spaniards eat a lot of fish, y nosotros vivimos en Nueva Delhi. We live in New Delhi, for example. So these endings are r, and ir, and the verb changes accordingly, according to the subject pronoun. So it is, for yo it is o, right, as in hablo, como, vivo. For tú it is as for the AR ending verbs, so it is hablas. For the AR ending verbs, R verbs, ER ending verbs, para los verbos que terminan en R y los verbos que terminan en IR. For the R and IR ending verbs, it is S, it is common. So for example, comes and vives. For the third person singular and the second person respect form, which is usted, él, ella, usted, the ending is a, habla, and for er and ir, for the second and third conjugations, it is a or e in English. So it is come, vive. For nosotros, nosotras, which is we, the first person plural, it is amos for r ending verbs, and for er ending verbs, it is amos, and for ir ending verbs, it is imos. So accordingly, we have the conjugations as hablamos, comemos, vivimos. For the vosotros form, which is second person plural form, it is ais for the r ending verbs. For the er and ending verbs, it is eis. For the ir ending verbs, it is. So for example, we have correspondingly habláis, vosotros coméis y vosotros vivís. For the third person plural, ellos, ellas, and the second person respect plural, ustedes, the forms are an for r ending verbs, and for both the er and the ir ending verbs, it is en. So it would be ellos y ustedes hablan, comen, viven. Study the conjugations and remember that the first person singular yo has the same ending in all three conjugations, hablo, como, vivo. In the er and ir verb conjugations, all three third person singular forms have the same endings, like come, vive. The subject pronouns are usually omitted in Spanish. Again, please pay attention to this point. Verb endings give information about the subject. What are the uses of the present tense in Spanish? ¿Cuáles son los usos del presente en español? The present tense is used in Spanish to describe an action happening now. Often it is translated with the ing form in English. For example, ahora veo a Susana. Now I see Susana. Carlos llega a la puerta. Carlos is arriving at the gate. Remember, Carlos llega a la puerta communicates what in English is expressed by Carlos is arriving at the gate. Right? If you translate literally, it would be Carlos arrives at the gate. The present tense is also used to express actions that takes place regularly in a habitual way, although the actions may not be occurring in the present. Expressions of time and other adverbs are often used to indicate that these actions take place routinely in the present. For example, normalmente compro las frutas en el supermercado. Usually, I buy fruit at the supermarket. The present tense is also used to describe events that will take place in the near future, a reference to the future that may appear in the context or sentence. Por ejemplo, mañana discuto el plan con ustedes en la reunión. Tomorrow I'll discuss the plan at the meeting. Este verano viajo a Francia. I will travel to France this summer. The present tense is also used to ask questions, especially questions requesting permission or someone's opinion or preference. ¿Bebes té o café? Do you drink coffee or tea? ¿Abro la puerta? Shall I open the door? ¿Vendemos la casa? Do we sell the house? Keep in mind that the auxiliary verb do in English is not translated in Spanish. An auxiliary verb is not needed to ask a question in Spanish. Please pay attention. Now, dear students, queridos aprendientes, vamos a estudiar los verbos irregulares en el presente indicativo. Let's talk about irregular verbs in the present tense. So, many Spanish verbs do not follow the patterns of the regular verbs we have just studied. Instead, they change the root or radical of the verb, the conjugation endings, or both. Because they follow different patterns, they are considered irregular verbs. Since irregular verbs are so commonly used, a good strategy to identify and learn them is to focus on similarities, grouping them into patterns, right? Because it would be humanly impossible to memorize all irregular verbs in Spanish, isn't it? Los verbos con irregularidad en la primera persona del singular. Now let's look at one of these groupings or patterns that we have talked about. One of them is the verbs with irregular first person singular only. All other forms in the present are regular. Un grupo de verbos de uso muy frecuente tiene solo la primera persona irregular. Las otras formas, chicos, las otras formas son irregulares, right? So, in this category, we have verbs like caber, to fit. The first person is irregular. It is not cabo, right? You would just remove the air and you would put an O in there. So, it should be, technically speaking, it should be cabo, yo cabo, but that's horrible. It's wrong. It is yo quepo, right? Saber, to know. Again, not sabo. Dear students, not sabo. Saber is sé, yo sé. Yo sé el español. I know Spanish. Yo sé el inglés. I know English. Caer, to fall, is caigo, right? So, caigo. Yo caigo de la motocicleta. I fall from the motorcycle. Salir, to leave, is salgo, no salo. Salgo de noche con mis amigos. I go out at night with my friends. Dar is to give. Doy, right? Doy clases de español. I give Spanish classes or I teach Spanish. Traer, to bring. Traigo, right? Traigo mi cuaderno a la clase. I bring my notebook to the class. Valer, to be worth. Valgo, yo valgo mucho, I'm worth a lot, right? Hacer, un verbo muy importante, queridos estudiantes. Hacer is to do. Hago, yo hago. Hago los deberes. I do my homework, right? Ver, to see. Veo, veo, right? Not bo. Ver es veo. Veo películas en español. No, I watch films in Spanish. The compounds of these verbs are also irregular in the yo form only. Only in the first person singular, chicos. So it's only in the yo form. They add the consonant G between the root and the verb ending. Compounds are easy to spot because they show a prefix. Des, this, con, etc. preceding the root. Here is a list of frequently used compounds of hacer, poner and traer. So, componer is to compose, compongo. Now, we have seen that poner is pongo, right? To put, and it is irregular in the first person. So, similarly, the compound to compose is compongo. Yo compongo canciones. I compose songs. Proponer, to propose, is propongo. Deshacer, to undo, is deshago. As you've seen, hacer es hago, right? Rehacer, to remake or redo, is rehago. The first person irregular form of disponer, to arrange, is dispongo. Reponer, to replace, is repongo. Distraerse, to get distracted or to distract, is distraigo. Suponer, to suppose, is supongo. No? For example, supongo que os gusta el español. No? I suppose that you all like Spanish. Supongo que os gusta el español. Now, dear students, let's study a very distinct category or a subcategory amongst these verbs with first person singular irregularity, right? So ese es el caso de los verbos como parecer, conocer, traducir, etc. Words that end in a vowel followed by cer and cir change C to ZC, cetase, in the first person singular only. They are conjugated like conocer. Conozco muy bien a Renata. I know Renata very well. ¿Vale? Los verbos que terminan en una vocal seguida por cer y cir cambian la C a ZC en la primera persona singular solamente. ¿Vale? Se conjugan como conocer. Ahora, verbos como conocer, agradecer, to thank or to be grateful. Again, the first person singular, which is irregular, is agradezco. Aparecer, the first person singular form, which is irregular, is aparezco. Aparecer means to appear. Complacer, to please, complazco. Crecer, to grow, crezco. Establecer, to establish, establezco. Merecer, to deserve, merezco. Ofrecer, to offer, ofrezco. Padecer, to suffer, padezco. Permanecer, to remain, permanezco. Pertenecer, to belong, pertenezco. Reconocer, to recognize, reconozco. Ejemplos, yo merezco una promoción. I deserve a promotion. So again, I deserve will not be yo merezco. Again, we've seen the subject pronoun is omitted, and merecer, which is regular in all other forms, is irregular only in the first person singular. It is irregular only in this particular form. So it is merezco una promoción. Me parezco a mi madre. I resemble my mother. Again, parecerse a, to resemble someone. We have seen that the verb parecer is also used with the reflexive pronoun, although it's not a reflexive verb, but it's used with the reflexive pronoun, and we see that it changes to me parezco a mi madre. Verbs like traducir, which end in cir, as we have seen the case of verbs like conocer. Now we see the case of verbs like traducir. Traducir is to translate, traduzco. Conducir, to drive, to lead. For example, the first person singular becomes conduzco, not conduco, right? Producir isn't produco, but it becomes produzco, to produce. Ejemplos: traduzco documentos del español al inglés. I translate documents from Spanish into English. So I translate becomes traduzco. Now, dear students, let's look at the verbs with spelling changes in the present tense. Verbos con modificación ortográfica en la primera persona del singular. In the present tense, certain verbs have spelling changes. These are determined by Spanish rules of pronunciation to preserve the sound appearing in the infinitive. The following groups of verbs have spelling changes before the verb ending O in the yo form only in the first person singular. Verbs ending in ger or gir change the G to jota before the O ending, right? They change G to J before the O ending. The examples of these verbs are coger, to catch or grab, exigir, to demand. So coger becomes cojo, coges, coge, cogemos, cogéis, cogen. As we can see, it's only irregular in the first person where it's not written with the G, although it's pronounced as cojo. If you write a G there, it becomes cogo according to Spanish pronunciation rules. So it has to be with a J, right? Tenéis que escribir la J en vez de la G. Entonces tenemos cojo. Los verbos como encoger, to shrink. Again, as you can see there, the first person irregular form is encojo. Escoger, to choose. I choose would be escojo. Proteger, to protect, protejo, right? Protejo a mis padres. I protect my parents, for example. Recoger, to pick up, recojo. Recojo a mi madre de su trabajo. I pick up my mother from her work. Recojo a mi madre. So the recojo, the first person singular, is irregular with the J, con una J. Verbs like exigir, which means to demand, would be dirigir, to direct. Dirijo. Fingir, to pretend, finjo. Verbs ending in gir change gu to G before the O ending. Dear students, this is another category. Los verbos que terminan en gir cambian la gu a la G antes de la terminación en O. So we have, for example, distinguish. To distinguish is distinguir, so it will be distingo, right? They just an O there, and the verbs lose their original ending, right? So it is yo distingo. Verbs like distinguir are extinguir, to extinguish, which will be extingo, right? Dear students, I hope you have this is clear, right? How these endings change only in the first person singular, right? The rest are perfectly regular. Now we also have the case of verbs ending in fer and fir, which change the C to Z or Z before the O ending. Los verbos que terminan en fer y fir cambian la C a la Z antes de la terminación en O. So the classic example in this category is convencer, right? To convince. To convince would be convenzo, right? Convenzo, convences, convence, convencemos, convencéis, convencen. So convenzo is again the first person irregular. Yo convenzo. Verbs like convencer, ejercer, to practice, for example, to practice a profession, ejerzo. Vencer, to overcome, venzo. Right? Ejerzo de profesor en una universidad. I work as a professor at a university. Now let's practice some of these forms, right? So for example, I give. ¿Cómo se dice en español? I give, I bring, I eat, you see, you do, I go out, I know Ramon. Now all of these are irregular conjugations. As you can see in the first person, all of these verbs will entail or will require an irregular first person conjugation. So for example, I give is obviously yo doy. I bring is yo traigo. I eat is yo como. You see is you as in ustedes, the second person plural form, which is the respect form. Ustedes ven. You do, tú haces. I go out, yo voy. I know Ramon, yo conozco a Ramon. Now, dear students, if you're wondering why I have put a bracket there, why I put the subject pronouns in parenthesis, it is because again I have repeat this again that these subject pronouns are usually omitted in Spanish. That's why you will see that in English, where they are required, there is no parenthesis, but in Spanish there is a parenthesis. These pronouns appear in a parenthesis, in a bracket, right? So, doy simply is enough, traigo is enough, como is enough, yo como, or you can just say como a las 2 de la tarde. I have lunch at 2 in the afternoon. Escribe la forma correspondiente del verbo entre paréntesis. Right, the corresponding form of the verb which is in the bracket, right? So, for example, yo un coche japonés. So, we have to conjugate the verb conducir. Dear students, do you remember what is the conjugation of conducir? Well, yes, you're right. Yo conduzco un coche japonés. I drive a Japanese car. Luisa y tú salir de casa juntos. So what would be the corresponding form? I'm talking to a person called Luisa and you dear student, for example, if you have a friend called Luisa y tú salís de casa juntos, right? You use the vosotros form. Yo no conocer a esa familia. Yo no conozco a esa familia, right? ¿Quién ofrecer más por esta escultura? Who will offer more for this sculpture? ¿Quién ofrece? Right? The third person singular of ofrecer would be ofrece. ¿Quién ofrece más por esta escultura? Yo no merecer este regalo. Yo no merezco este regalo. Los asistentes del director obedecer sus órdenes. Director's assistants obey his orders. So here, as we see, obedecer would be regular only in the first person singular, right? Obedezco. But the correct answer here is, los asistentes del director obedecen sus órdenes. Tú pertenecer a una familia muy famosa. Pertenecer, as you've seen, is to belong. Tú perteneces a una familia muy famosa. Santiago conocer a los padres de Carmen. Here we'll use the third person singular of conocer because we're talking about Santiago, and here we'll say Santiago conoce a los padres de Carmen. Conocer, as you have seen, would be irregular only in the first person singular. It would be conozco, but here the correct answer is conoce. Resumen de la sesión. Summary of the session. In this session, we have learned how to revise the conjugation of irregular verbs in the present tense, looked at some of the uses of the present tense, learned to conjugate verbs with irregularity in the first person singular. In the next session, we will learn how to conjugate r and er ending verbs with vowel changes, conjugate ir and uir ending verbs with vowel changes, conjugate verbs with more than one irregularity or spelling change, conjugate totally irregular verbs. Gracias, queridos estudiantes.